Stop telling me he's dead. He isn't dead. A man doesn't just vanish into thin air unless he wants to escape a monster. And I was the monster. She had the empire. She had the money. But she sold her soul to get it. Now, 3 years later, Gemma Barrett is hiring the most dangerous detective in the city to find the husband she betrayed. But the truth might just kill her. The skyline of Seattle looked like a circuit board of diamonds against the velvet throat of the night. But from the 45th floor of the Barrett Grayson Tower, it felt cold. Cold enough to freeze the breath in your lungs. Gemma Barrett stood by the window, her reflection ghosting over the city lights. At 34, she was the picture of modern success. Her tailored Givenchy suit fit her like armor. Her hair was a sharp, blonde bob that suggested precision and control. But her eyes, dark, haunted, and rimmed with the red fatigue of insomnia, told a different story. "You're staring again, Gemma," a voice drawled from the doorway. Gemma didn't turn. She knew exactly what Carter Grayson looked like without looking. He would be wearing a smirk, a tumbler of scotch in one hand, and that air of arrogant ownership that used to thrill her but now made her skin crawl. "Go home, Carter," she said, her voice flat. "This is my office too," Carter replied, stepping into the room. He smelled of expensive cologne and old money. "We have the merger with the Japanese tech firm in the morning. You need sleep, not another night pining over a ghost." "He's not a ghost," Gemma snapped, finally turning to face him. "He's my husband." Carter laughed, a dry, brittle sound. "Ex-husband, for all intents and purposes. Tobias has been gone 3 years, Gem. 3 years. If he wanted to be found, he would have been. He couldn't handle your success. He couldn't handle that you outgrew him and his little quaint dreams. He was weak." "He wasn't weak," Gemma shouted, the outburst echoing in the sterile room. "He was the only real thing in my life, and I pushed him out." Carter's expression hardened. "We did what was necessary to build this," he gestured around the opulent office. "You chose this life, Gemma. You chose the penthouse, the power, and yes, you chose me as your partner in business. Don't rewrite history just because you're lonely." He downed his drink and set the glass on her mahogany desk with a heavy clack. "Get over it, or you'll lose everything we built. Tobias Black is dead to this world. Let him rot." When the door clicked shut behind him, Gemma felt the familiar suffocating pressure in her chest. Carter was wrong. Tobias wasn't dead. She felt it in her bones. But Carter was right about one thing. She had chosen this. 3 years ago, Gemma had been a struggling graphic designer, and Tobias had been a carpenter with rough hands and a heart the size of the ocean. They had nothing but debt and laughter. Then came the app idea. Gemma's concept, Tobias's encouragement. But when the investors circled, specifically Carter Grayson, they demanded a ruthless CEO. They demanded a brand. They demanded single-minded focus. Carter had whispered in her ear that Tobias was a liability. "He's too simple, Gemma. He'll hold you back. He doesn't understand the Shark Tank." And she had listened. She had started staying late with Carter. She had mocked Tobias's lack of ambition at dinner parties. She had let Carter touch her hand a little too long in front of him. And finally, on the night she signed the multi-million-dollar partnership with Carter, she came home to tell Tobias she wanted a break to focus on her career. She found the ring on the kitchen counter. No note, no clothes missing. Just the ring and the silence. She shook herself from the memory and grabbed her phone. Her fingers trembled as she dialed a number her assistant, Kiara, had slipped her 3 days ago. It rang 4 times. "Kane Investigations," a voice rasped. It sounded like gravel in a blender. "Mr. Kane?" Gemma asked, struggling to keep her CEO voice steady. "My name is Gemma Barrett. I need to hire you." I know who you are, lady, Mason Kane replied. He sounded unimpressed. I don't do corporate espionage. Call a lawyer. I don't need a lawyer. I need a bloodhound. Gemma gripped the phone tighter. I need you to find my husband. Money is no object. There was a long pause on the other end. She could hear the flick of a lighter and the inhale of a cigarette. Be at my office in the meatpacking district in 30 minutes, Mason said, and leave the checkbook. I want to see if you're telling the truth first. Mason Kane's office was the antithesis of the Barrett Grayson Tower. It was located above a Thai noodle shop that vented spicy steam directly into his waiting room. The blinds were slat-broken, allowing slices of neon light to cut across the dusty floor. Mason himself sat behind a scarred metal desk. He was a mountain of a man, looking more like a retired heavyweight boxer than a detective. He had a scar running through his left eyebrow and eyes that were unnervingly perceptive. He watched Gemma navigate the room, noting how she hesitated to touch the chair before sitting. Nice suit, Mason grunted. Costs more than my rent for the year. I didn't come here to discuss fashion, Mr. Kane, Gemma said, crossing her legs. She tried to project authority, but in this room, her power meant nothing. Right. The missing husband, Tobias Black. Mason picked up a file folder. It was empty. He dropped it back down. I did a quick search while you were driving over. No credit card activity in 3 years. No social security hits. No renewed driver's license. No death certificate. It's like he walked off the edge of the earth. I know, Gemma whispered. I hired private investigators before. The expensive ones. They found nothing. The expensive ones look at data, Mason said, leaning forward. People who want to disappear don't generate data. They go analog. Why did he leave, Mrs. Barrett? Gemma looked away. We grew apart. Mason slammed his hand on the desk, making Gemma jump. Don't lie to me. If you want me to find a man who's been a ghost for 1,000 days, you strip your soul bare right now. Why did he leave? Gemma felt tears prick her eyes. The shame was a physical weight, a stone she had swallowed 3 years ago that hadn't dissolved. I betrayed him, she choked out. Not physically. I never slept with Carter while we were married, but I betrayed him in every other way. I humiliated him. I chose the company over him. I let Carter convince me that Tobias was small, unimportant. She took a shaky breath. The night he left, I was going to ask for a separation. I came home, high on champagne and success, ready to cut him loose. But he beat me to it. He left his wedding ring. It was cheap gold. We bought it at a pawn shop. I used to love it. But that night, looking at it next to my diamond bracelet, I felt relief. And now? Mason asked quietly. Now I have everything, Gemma said, her voice breaking. And I have nothing. I need to tell him I'm sorry. I need to know he's okay. I need absolution. Mason studied her for a long, uncomfortable minute. He saw the genuine agony behind the makeup. He saw a woman who had climbed to the peak of the mountain only to realize she had left her oxygen tank at the bottom. I have a condition, Mason said. Anything, double your rate. No, I don't want your money yet. I want access, full access. Your emails, your texts from 3 years ago, your bank statements, and his old workshop. If he left a trail, it's in the things he loved, not the things he hated. Gemma nodded. Done. The next morning, Mason started with the one person Gemma trusted, Kiara Monroe. Kiara met him at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the tower. She was younger, sharp-eyed, with braids pulled back in a practical bun. She's falling apart, isn't she? Kiara asked, blowing on her latte. She's holding it together with hairspray and denial, Mason corrected. Tell me about Tobias. You knew him. I was their first employee, Kiara said softly. Before the high-rise, when it was just the 3 of us in a garage. Tobias. He was the glue. Gemma was the engine, sure, but Tobias was the steering wheel. He kept her grounded. He made the coffee. He built the desks. He listened when she panicked. And Carter Grayson? Kiara's lip curled. A vulture. He saw Gemma's talent and wanted to monetize it. He couldn't control Gemma while Tobias was there, because Tobias knew Gemma's real value wasn't in the stock price, but in her creativity. So Carter started a whisper campaign. Gaslighting, really, making Gemma feel like Tobias was embarrassing her. Did Tobias know? Tobias knew everything, Kiara said sadly. He wasn't stupid. He was just kind. Too kind. The week before he vanished, he came to me. He gave me a box of files, said, "Keep these safe, Kai. Gemma might need them when the fog clears." Mason's eyes narrowed. You still have the box? Under my bed, Kiara said. I never opened it. I felt like I was betraying her if I looked, and betraying him if I threw it away. Get it, Mason said, standing up. Now, the box was an old shoebox, battered and taped shut. Mason sat in his office, the contents spread out over the scarred metal desk. Gemma sat across from him, her face pale. I didn't know he kept these, she whispered. They weren't financial records. They were sketches, dozens of them. Sketches of Gemma sleeping, sketches of her working, sketches of a house by a lake with a large porch. And underneath the sketches were letters. Unsent letters addressed to My Gem. Mason picked one up and read aloud. She's flying so high now, Kai. I'm so proud of her. But the air is thin up there and she's starting to hallucinate. She thinks Grayson is a savior. I know he's a shark. If I stay, she'll resent me. She'll think I'm the anchor dragging her down. I have to cut the rope so she can soar. But God, it hurts. Gemma put a hand over her mouth, a sob escaping her throat. He left to protect me? From myself? He left because he loved you enough to let you make your own mistakes, Mason said bluntly. But look at this. He pointed to the corner of a sketch of the lake house. There were coordinates scribbled in pencil, faint, almost rubbed out. 442421N, 121.1687W. Where is that? Gemma asked. Central Oregon, Mason said, typing into his laptop. High desert, middle of nowhere, near a place called Sisters. Tobias hates the desert. He loves the ocean, Gemma argued. People change, Mrs. Barrett, especially when they're trying to kill who they used to be. Mason stood up and grabbed his coat. I'm flying out tonight. You stay here. Keep Grayson happy. If he catches wind that we have a lead, he might try to interfere. He likes his control over you. I'm coming with you, Gemma insisted, standing up. No, Mason said, his voice hard. If he sees you, he runs again. This time for good. Let me make contact. Let me see what we're dealing with. Mason arrived in Oregon 24 hours later. The landscape was a stark contrast to the rainy claustrophobia of Seattle. Here, the sky was vast and blue, the air smelling of pine and dry sagebrush. The Three Sisters Mountains loomed in the distance, snow-capped sentinels watching his rental car kick up dust on a gravel road. The coordinates led him to a property set back miles from the main highway. It wasn't a shack. It was a sprawling, half-finished structure made of raw timber and stone. It looked like a lodge, or perhaps a fortress. Mason parked the car a mile out and hiked the rest of the way, keeping to the tree line. He used his binoculars to scan the property. He saw movement. A man was working on the roof of a barn. He was shirtless, his skin bronzed by the sun, muscles moving fluidly as he hammered shingles. He had a beard, thick and unkempt, and his hair was long, tied back in a leather thong. It was Tobias Black, but not the soft, smiling man from the photos Gemma had shown him. This man looked like he had been carved out of the mountain itself. He looked harder, dangerous. Suddenly, a woman stepped out of the main house. She was tall, with dark skin and a commanding presence. Thalia Cross, Mason assumed, though he didn't know her name yet. She was carrying a pitcher of water. Tobias climbed down the ladder, and the way he looked at her, it wasn't romantic exactly, but it was deeply intimate. A partnership. Mason pulled out his phone. He had promised to call Gemma, but his gut screamed a warning. There was something else. As Tobias took the water, he turned his head toward the tree line where Mason was hiding. He didn't see Mason. He couldn't have. But Tobias stood perfectly still, his head cocked, listening to the wind. Then, Tobias did something that chilled Mason's blood. He reached out and touched the woman's face, tracing her jawline with his thumb. But his eyes didn't focus on her. They looked through her. Mason zoomed in with the binoculars. Tobias's eyes were a milky, clouded blue. He's blind, Mason realized with a jolt. The man is stone blind. Mason retreated down the hill, his heart hammering. He got back to his car and dialed Gemma. "Did you find him?" Gemma's voice was frantic. "Mason, tell me." "I found him," Mason said, his voice grim. Is he alone?" "No," Mason said. "And Gemma, you need to prepare yourself. The Tobias you knew is dead. The man I found on that mountain, I don't think he wants to be saved. And I don't think he can see you, even if he wanted to." "What do you mean?" "I mean," Mason said, watching the dust swirl around his car, "I think your husband went blind, and I think he's building an army." Gemma Barrett hung up the phone, her hand shaking so violently she had to brace it against the solid marble edge of her desk. Blind. The word was a physical blow. Not merely gone, but broken. And building an army? Mason's pronouncement was a melodrama, but the image of Tobias, hardened and partnered with another woman, was terrifyingly real. She stared out at the city she owned, feeling utterly powerless. Mason Kane had told her to wait, to keep Carter Grayson happy. But waiting felt like a fresh betrayal. If Tobias was injured, vulnerable, and redefining himself miles away, she couldn't afford to be the CEO in the Givenchy suit pretending she had it together. She had to see him. She had to understand. Within 3 hours, Gemma was on a private jet, the sharp scent of cedar and high desert air replacing the humid dampness of Seattle. She landed in Bend, rented a nondescript SUV, and drove toward the coordinates. She didn't contact Mason. She simply tracked his rental car to a turnout near the property, a sign he was still observing. Mason found her an hour after sunset, crouched low in the pine trees, clutching a thermos of coffee like a lifeline. "You're an idiot, Mrs. Barrett," Mason hissed, pulling her further into the dark cover of the woods. "I had to come, Mason. Tell me everything. Is he really blind?" Gemma whispered, her voice tight with suppressed grief. "Stone blind. Optic nerves fried, looks like," Mason confirmed, his tone professional, but his eyes softened for a fraction of a second. "And the army isn't what you think. It's a community, a sanctuary. It's called the Forge. He calls them builders, ex-vets, people who need a second start, people who need purpose." "And the woman?" "Thalia Cross," Mason supplied. "She's a partner in the project, ex-military engineer. She's his eyes, his coordinator, and his anchor. The loyalty here runs deep. They're building sustainable off-grid housing using salvaged materials. Tobias is teaching them carpentry and structural integrity. He's running a school for decency." The realization hit Gemma with the force of a train. Tobias wasn't running from his weakness. He was running to his strength. She had called his dreams quaint. He had turned them into a life-saving mission. "I need to talk to him," Gemma said, pushing past Mason. Mason grabbed her arm, his grip like steel. "No, not yet. I spoke to him this afternoon. I told him I was a land surveyor looking for property lines. He saw right through me. Or rather, heard right through me. His other senses are razor sharp. He's protected." "What did he say?" "He told me that if he wanted the life he left, he would have stayed in it. He said the only thing he misses about sight is the memory of your face. But he immediately followed that with, "The memory of Gemma Barrett is a weakness I learned to carve out of my life, the same way I carve wood." Gemma stumbled backward, catching herself on a thick tree trunk. His words were worse than any scream. "I can't believe he's doing this to himself," Gemma choked out. "He must be in pain. Why didn't he get help?" "I think the injury happened right before he left," Mason said, lowering his voice. "Something acute. I was going to push for details, but then Thalia stepped in. She's the gatekeeper. She's intensely protective of him, almost like a sentinel." Mason then decided to gamble. "Look, I know a dilapidated hunting cabin about a mile from here. We can hole up there tonight. Tomorrow I'm going to approach them with a genuine business offer, a donation, maybe funding for a new project. You stay hidden and you listen, but if he catches a hint that you're here, he'll pack up and vanish again. Do you understand?" Gemma nodded, tears tracing clean paths through the dust on her cheeks. "I understand. He gets to choose if he sees me." Mason led her through the dense woods to a small, isolated cabin. The air inside was musty and cold. As Mason set up a minimal perimeter, Gemma sat on the rough, splintered floor, pulling the shoebox of Tobias's belongings onto her lap. The letters, the sketches. In the faint beam of her phone's flashlight, she examined the house sketch again. The coordinates were on the back, but she noticed another detail. A faint oil stain near the corner, a chemical residue she immediately recognized from their early days in the garage. "Mason," she called softly, holding up the drawing. "This is old hydraulic fluid. We used it for the server cooling system on the first massive server bank we bought for the app." Mason looked at it, his face grim. "Is it toxic?" "Only if you're exposed to it long term. But wait!" Gemma's mind raced, connecting a new, devastating possibility. "Carter was paranoid about cost. He made me sign off on a non-standard cheap cooling system called Cryomax. I remember Tobias arguing with him about the volatile compound in it. Carter called him a worrywart." "And when did Tobias vanish?" Mason asked, his voice low. "The night after we signed the big partnership. The night the new servers went live in the tower data center. The same week he gave Kiara the files," Gemma said, her voice dropping to a horrified whisper. "Tobias wasn't just working in the workshop before he left. He was in the server room trying to re-engineer the system, or maybe trying to disable the data siphon before it went live." Mason reached out and gently took the sketch. "His blindness wasn't just a consequence of stress, Gemma. It might have been an industrial injury, an act of corporate sabotage disguised as an escape. He was blinded trying to clean up your mess." Gemma felt the air leave her lungs. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was biological. She hadn't just driven him away, she had set the trap that took his sight. This knowledge was a new, crushing layer of guilt. She was not just the woman who scorned him. She was, indirectly, the cause of his darkness. Gemma spent the next 2 days in self-imposed exile in the cabin, watching the forge from a distance through Mason's high-powered scope. It was a crucible of purpose. She saw Tobias move with a fierce confidence, his massive hands guiding a younger man's saw, his body responding to Thalia's verbal cues with seamless trust. Thalia Cross was magnificent. She moved with the quiet authority of a person who knew exactly who she was and what she was doing. She wasn't draped over Tobias. She was beside him, an equal pillar in the community structure. Gemma watched them coordinate the hoisting of a massive beam. Tobias, blind, was directing the entire team, relying purely on sound and the tactile knowledge of his materials. Thalia provided the precise coordinates and warnings, her voice calm and steady. It was the sight of Tobias laughing, a deep, unburdened sound that Gemma hadn't heard in years, that finally broke her. He was happy. He was whole. And she was the stain of his past life. Late that evening, Mason returned to the cabin after a day spent establishing contact with the Forge under the guise of an investor. "He talks about you," Mason reported, lighting a small, contained fire in the cabin's stone hearth. "Not often, but when someone mentions Seattle or big business, he gets a certain stillness. He said he learned the hardest lesson of his life, that sometimes ambition isn't a ladder, it's a deep-sea dive. You can find pearls, but the pressure will crush you." Gemma, who had been meticulously going through the shoebox contents again, looked up, her face etched with a newfound resolve. "He didn't just leave the company, he tried to save it from itself. And he tried to save me." She pulled out a small, folded section of a financial report that had been taped inside the shoebox cover, invisible to a casual search. It was a projection for Q4, 3 years ago, showing a massive unaccounted-for expenditure masked as R&D, funneled through an entity called Cerberus Ventures. "This," Gemma said, her finger tapping the number, "this is the money Carter used to buy the cheap Cryomax coolant and to set up the data siphon. Cerberus Ventures. It's a known shell corporation he uses. I signed off on it, Mason. He told me it was a tax optimization strategy. I didn't question it. I wanted the merger." Gemma spread out her findings on the dirt floor, the chemical residue on the sketch, the date of his vanishing, the secret files given to Kiara, and now the Cerberus Ventures payment. Tobias was planning to blow the whistle, Gemma deduced, the pieces falling into place with sickening clarity. Carter Grayson was running a massive data harvesting scheme that violated every privacy law on the books, all masked by our app's success. Tobias went into the servers to encrypt or delete the initial data load before the launch. And that's when he was exposed to the coolant, the toxic fumes, or maybe the actual volatile elements, Mason finished for her, his voice low and dangerous. He didn't just walk away, Gemma. He was forced out by an injury that would compromise his testimony and a secret that would tank your company. He sacrificed his sight to protect the truth, Gemma whispered, the enormity of his love finally sinking in. And I let Carter tell me he was weak. The emotional betrayal, the verbal jabs and the cold shoulder had always been her primary source of guilt. Now she understood the stakes. Tobias's quaint dreams were about integrity. Her ambition with Carter was built on lies and literal toxicity. "We need proof that links Carter to the blindness," Mason stated, switching from observer to hunter. "A medical record, an internal email, anything showing he was aware of the coolant's dangers or the data siphon's existence." "I have the email that confirms the coolant purchase," Gemma said, pulling up an old, archived thread on her phone. "But Carter's smart. He always used voice calls for the really dirty stuff." "Then we create a situation where he has to use his fingers," Mason said, his eyes glittering. "But first you have to go back. You need to be his perfect, compliant CEO partner. The Japanese merger is days away. That is his endgame. If we disrupt that, he'll be exposed and he'll panic. He won't just betray you, he'll try to crush you." Gemma looked one last time through the scope. Tobias was sitting on the porch of the main lodge, a massive, unreadable presence. Thalia was reading aloud to him from a thick, worn book. The image was one of peace, but Gemma knew it was a peace bought with darkness. "I need to go back and kill the thing I created," Gemma said, her voice now cold and certain. The fear was gone, replaced by a terrible, righteous fury. "I won't just ask for forgiveness. I'll give him justice." Gemma returned to Seattle like a warrior emerging from the desert. The Givenchy suit was back on, but it wasn't armor anymore. It was camouflage. The red fatigue around her eyes was gone, replaced by a steely, terrifying focus. Carter Grayson met her in the lobby of Barrett Grayson Tower. He looked her over, sensing the change. "You look well, Gemma. Did you finally get a decent night's sleep?" he asked, his voice smooth and condescending. "I had a vision, Carter," she replied, her smile dazzling and utterly false. "About the future of the company. It's glorious." Carter laughed, a small, relieved sound. "That's my girl. The merger with Sumitomo Group is a go. We sign the final papers in 48 hours. Then, we are untouchable." "Absolutely," Gemma agreed, linking her arm through his. "But I think we need to celebrate tonight, just the two of us. I feel like we've been all business lately, and I need to remind myself why we started this." Carter's eyes lit up with triumph. He mistook her strategy for desire. Perfect, Gemma thought. He is so predictable. While Carter was busy arranging a celebration, Gemma met Mason in the deserted basement garage of her building. "I need two things, Mason," she said, handing him a flash drive. "First, I need you to find every connection between Cerberus Ventures and Carter Grayson's personal finances. He's been skimming millions off the top of R&D for 3 years to cover settlements and silence complaints. I need the trail. And the second thing? I need you to hack into my old internal emails and search for Cryomax and volatile compound. Then, I need you to forward all of them to my personal secure drive and to Kiara Monroe's personal email." "Why, Kiara?" "Because if I go down, I need someone outside the blast radius to leak the truth," Gemma explained. "Kiara was loyal to Tobias, and she has integrity. She'll do the right thing when the time comes." Mason nodded, impressed by her ruthlessness. "It'll be done by midnight. But you need to be careful. You're talking about corporate homicide. Grayson will fight dirty." "I know," Gemma said, her eyes meeting his. "I learned dirty from the best." As Mason worked, Gemma executed her subtle sabotage. She knew the Sumitomo deal hinged on the stability of the core app's data structure. During the final internal review, Gemma accidentally flagged a minor, non-existent security vulnerability in the system, forcing the compliance team to run a deep diagnostic. This diagnostic would inadvertently reveal the massive amount of hidden, siloed data, the result of the illegal siphon Tobias had tried to stop. The compliance team panicked, demanding a 24-hour delay to verify the integrity of the data stream before signing. Carter was furious. "What were you thinking, Gemma? We were minutes from the finish line," he roared in her office. "Risk management, Carter," she said smoothly. "We can't afford even the hint of a data breach right now. Sumitomo will walk. One more day. It's fine." Carter paced, his agitation growing. "It's not fine. We need this. Everything we built rides on this deal." "And who is responsible for the integrity of the product, Carter?" Gemma challenged, standing her ground. "You or me? I'm protecting us." Carter's eyes narrowed. He didn't trust her, but he couldn't afford to derail the deal himself. He needed her face, her talent, and her name. That night, Mason hit the jackpot. He found a document buried in the financial records of Cerberus Ventures, a liability waiver drafted 3 years ago, explicitly referencing the risks associated with the Cryomax coolant, and stipulating that any long-term health consequences, including acute optical neuropathy, were to be handled by a specialized off-the-books medical fund. And the signature authorizing the fund? Carter Grayson. But the twist that followed was even darker. Attached to the waiver was an email from Carter to his legal team, sent 3 days after Tobias left. "We can't let Black become a liability. His exit must look like a voluntary abandonment, effective immediately. If he surfaces, we leverage the spousal abandonment clause. Keep the Black medical fund quiet. This never happened." Mason stared at the screen, then called Gemma immediately. "It's worse than we thought, Gemma," Mason said, his voice hard with disgust. "Carter didn't just cause the blindness. He knew about it, and he used your pain, the idea that Tobias abandoned you, as legal leverage to ensure Tobias could never claim injury or expose the data siphon without being instantly discredited as an irresponsible runaway who forfeited all rights." Gemma listened to the confirmation of her deepest fears. The cold mask she wore cracked, just slightly, but she quickly sealed it again. "He built his empire on my weakness and Tobias's suffering," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "Send me the files, Mason, all of them, and then book me the first flight back to Oregon. I need to show Tobias what I'm fighting for." The next morning, Gemma walked into the Barrett Grayson Tower, not as a CEO, but as a revenant. The battle for her soul and Tobias's justice was about to begin. She knew the fight would not be fought with her ambition, but with her authenticity. Gemma Barrett walked into the 45th floor conference room of the Barrett Grayson Tower on the morning of the Sumitomo merger signing. She carried the weight of 3 years of lies and 3 days of cold, calculated truth. The air was thick with the scent of ambition and freshly brewed high-end coffee. The room, lined with panoramic glass, was a shimmering tableau of high-stakes commerce. Mr. Kaito and his legal team from Sumitomo sat on one side, their faces unreadable, while Carter Grayson and the corporate lawyers buzzed with smug anticipation on the other. Carter looked euphoric, his expensive silk tie slightly askew, his face flushed with pending victory. He leaned over and whispered to Gemma, his breath smelling of mint and triumph. "See, my dear, one little hiccup, and now we seal the deal. We did it. We built an empire, Gem." Gemma smiled back, a genuine but chilling expression that didn't reach her eyes. "We did, Carter. We certainly did. And now we tear it down." The initial formalities were conducted with the usual ritualistic patience, the reading of boilerplate, the final review of valuations. Carter, desperate to finish and celebrate, waived the customary final data security review. He was so close to the finish line, he couldn't bear another delay. This was the moment Gemma had been waiting for. Just as the Sumitomo lead lawyer, Mr. Kaito, reached for his pen to sign the definitive agreement, Gemma's personal assistant, Kiara Monroe, walked in. Kiara was a rock, her face impassive, her professionalism flawless. She held a thick, sealed, official-looking envelope. She addressed Gemma, her voice cutting through the unnatural silence of the room. "Ms. Barrett, I apologize for the intrusion, but this subpoena just arrived. The court insisted it be served immediately to both CEOs, referencing the pending sale of the core intellectual property and immediate asset seizure protocols." Carter shot up from his seat, his chair scraping violently against the polished floor. "A subpoena? What is this nonsense? I didn't authorize this, Kiara. Who is serving this?" Gemma took her envelope with a steady hand. Carter snatched his and ripped it open, his movements frantic. His face, moments ago radiating confidence, turned a sickly, mottled white as he read the title of the accompanying document. Class Action Lawsuit, Data Privacy Violations and Corporate Negligent Homicide. Tobias Blackett L.V. Barrett Grayson Technologies. Gemma looked directly at the Sumitomo team, who were already exchanging concerned glances. "My apologies, gentlemen. It seems we have a slight delay. In fact, a cessation of all current negotiations, as the primary assets of the company are now under review by federal authorities." Carter was sputtering, clutching the subpoena like a curse. "What did you do? What did you file? Tobias is legally MIA. He's nobody." "He was somebody enough to try and save the company you built on quicksand," Gemma replied calmly, the years of internalized subservience finally shattering. She took a step toward the center of the room. "I didn't file the suit, Carter. I merely supplied the evidence." She spoke clearly, distinctly, ensuring the corporate lawyers and the Japanese representatives heard every word. "I exposed the illegal data siphon you funneled through the Cerberus Ventures shell. I exposed the $1 million theft from R&D to cover your initial payoffs. And most importantly, I provided the liability waiver you signed, confirming your knowledge of the toxic Cryomax coolant that caused acute optical neuropathy, otherwise known as Tobias Black's blindness." Carter was breathing heavily, his eyes blazing with the cornered fury of a true narcissist realizing his control had vanished. "You suicidal idiot," he hissed, the corporate mask completely gone. "You just destroyed everything. Your company, your money, your life. You'll be ruined. You did this all for that weak carpenter." "He wasn't weak," Gemma stated, her voice resonating with an unshakable conviction. She finally met his eyes, allowing herself the pure, clean satisfaction of seeing his fear. "He was the only one with integrity. You didn't just blind him, Carter. You compromised the data of 60 million users to fund your illegal enterprise. I have the liability waiver, the bank transfers, and your email to your legal team confirming the spousal abandonment scheme. All of it is now on the desk of the district attorney and the SEC, thanks to the diligence of Mr. Mason Kane." Just then, Mason Kane stepped through the main doors, his massive frame filling the doorway. He didn't speak, but his presence was enough. Carter, seeing the detective and realizing the finality of the trap, momentarily lost all control. He grabbed Gemma's arm so tightly his nails dug into her skin, but she didn't fight him, only looked at the angry, desperate man he had become. He then shoved her hard enough that she stumbled, sending a stack of legal papers flying. He bolted, sprinting toward the private elevator, his expensive shoes slapping frantically on the marble floor. "The police are already waiting in the lobby for the other charges, Carter," Mason called out, his voice echoing. "Don't bother." The merger collapsed instantly. Mr. Kaito simply nodded curtly to Gemma, a gesture that seemed to acknowledge her desperate honesty, and departed with his team. The next few hours were a dizzying blur of sirens, arrests, and the shattering of the Barrett-Grayson myth. Gemma watched from her office window as the news vans clustered below like hungry insects. She had won the battle, exchanging a massive empire for a clean conscience. She resigned immediately, handing her shares and operational control over to Kiara Monroe, who, true to her loyalty to Tobias's original vision, promised to stabilize the company and focus on genuine data integrity. Gemma walked out of the tower for the last time, not as a wealthy CEO, but as a woman stripped bare, carrying only a single small bag and the shoebox of letters. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a profound and frightening stillness. Gemma drove straight through the night, trading the neon chaos of the city for the vast, star-dusted silence of the Oregon high desert. The change was physical. The recycled, filtered air of the tower replaced by the cold, clean scent of pine and sagebrush. She arrived back at the forge under a weak, late-afternoon sun. She found Mason Kane waiting for her near the tree line, calmly polishing a pair of binoculars. "It's done," Mason confirmed, looking up from his task. "Grayson is being held without bail. The company will survive. Kiara's handling it, but the name Barrett is mud right now. You're essentially bankrupt." "Good," Gemma said, not sounding troubled in the slightest. "I deserve it. Now I need to see him." Mason shook his head, gesturing towards the main lodge. "Thalia knows you're here. I told her what you did, that you blew up your entire life to give him justice. She said Tobias won't see you unless you come in clean." "What does that mean exactly?" Gemma asked, already reaching for the zipper of her travel bag. "It means you leave the suit, the phone, the jewelry, the pretense," Mason said, his gaze steady. "She said he needs to hear the real Gemma, the one without the armor, the one he left behind." Gemma changed in the back of her SUV, stripping off the expensive, tailored cashmere coat and suit for a plain, thin cotton shirt and worn jeans, clothes she'd bought at a thrift store on the drive out, the closest she had to real clothes. She left the heavy diamond wedding ring replacement and her now useless corporate phone in the glove box. She walked the last half-mile carrying only the shoebox. The rough path was a penance. She found Tobias in his workshop, a large, open-sided barn filled with the powerful scent of sawdust and burnt cedar, a smell that spoke of creation and fire. He was meticulously running his massive hands over a piece of joinery, a complex mortise and tenon joint, his face serene but distant, focusing entirely on the tactile feedback. Thalia stood nearby, sharpening a chisel on a whetstone, the rhythmic shunk-shunk of the steel, a subtle warning. Thalia spoke first, her voice firm and devoid of emotion. "Gemma Barrett, you did what you said you would. We've been watching the news. Tobias is safe now. The charges against him are nullified. Your debt to his liberty is paid." "I didn't come to pay a debt, Thalia," Gemma said, her voice shaking slightly but holding steady. "I came for him, to look at him without a skyscraper between us." Tobias lifted his head, turning his milky blue eyes towards the sound of her voice. He didn't speak, but his posture, the subtle, involuntary tightening in his shoulders, betrayed his recognition. He was a man who listened with his entire body. "I'm sorry, Tobias," Gemma managed, the simple words feeling inadequate, catching in her throat like sand. She knelt on the sawdust floor, feeling the sharp splinters through her thin jeans. "I'm so sorry. For everything. For betraying you. For letting Carter poison my mind and my life. For choosing the money and the penthouse over your kindness. For not listening to you about the coolant. I knew the risk, and I signed off on the purchase because Carter made me feel stupid for questioning him." She choked back a sob that tasted like copper and regret. "I am responsible for the darkness you live in." Tobias remained silent for a long moment, the only sound the gentle whistle of the evening wind and the metallic shunk of Thalia's work. Thalia stepped closer to him, placing a protective, proprietary hand on his back. "He already knows you destroyed your empire for him, Gemma," Thalia said. "But that doesn't heal the blindness. That doesn't heal the humiliation. That doesn't heal the abandonment." Gemma opened the shoebox and pulled out the old, cheap pawn shop ring, the first ring. It looked pathetic and tiny against the backdrop of the massive, rough workbench. She held it out. "This is all that's left of the real us," she whispered. "I kept it safe. I tried to replace it, Tobias, with diamonds and ambition, with things that sparkled but had no light. I was blind, too. Blind to what mattered. And that blindness cost you everything." Tobias finally spoke, his voice deeper and rougher than she remembered, stripped of its former gentle resonance. It was the voice of a man who spoke only when necessary. "You came here for absolution, Gemma. But you can't buy it, and you can't earn it. It has to be given. And the man who loved you, that man died when he inhaled that poison 3 years ago." "I know he did," Gemma affirmed, pushing the ring onto the workbench. "But I think the man who is here now, the one who builds decency, who guides with kindness, who has the courage of his convictions, is stronger. He's the one I should have fought for. The man who truly loved me didn't leave because he was weak. He left because he was protecting me from the darkness I was inviting into our lives." Tobias sighed, a sound of deep, profound exhaustion that seemed to come from the mountain air itself. "I knew the moment I heard your voice, Gemma. I knew the moment Mason started asking about me. You're still the storm. And I finally found the quiet." Gemma looked at Thalia, who watched the exchange with unblinking neutrality. "Thalia, I want to help the Forge. Not with money, but with my hands and my mind. I'm a graphic designer, a planner, a systems engineer. I can help scale this, organize the logistics, get the builders better tools, secure better land. I can become useful again, not just powerful. I want to be a builder, if you'll have me." Thalia finally looked at Tobias, the silent communication between them palpable. "She's offering herself as a builder, Tobias. She's offering a sacrifice, not a reunion. She's seeking purpose, not ownership." Tobias reached out his hand, sweeping the rough fingers across the workbench until they found the smooth metal of the pawn shop ring. He picked it up, feeling its contours one last time. "It wasn't the darkness that hurt the most, Gemma," he said, his voice quiet, filled with residual pain. "It was the knowledge that you believed the worst in me, that you thought I couldn't handle your success, that you thought I was small." He paused. "The man who stands before you doesn't need a wife. He needs honesty. He needs to know if the storm can find quiet enough to build with him." Gemma accepted the terms of her exile and her penance. She didn't go back to Seattle. She rented a small, rustic cabin miles from the forge and began the arduous process of rebuilding her life based on sweat equity. She offered no money, only labor. She became the logistics coordinator for the forge, using her ruthless CEO organizational skills to streamline their complex procurement of sustainable resources and manage the rotating schedules of volunteer builders and veterans seeking sanctuary. The transition was agonizingly slow and often humbling. Her first attempt to manage the timber deliveries resulted in a massive log jam on a poorly maintained access road, forcing Tobias and 3 other builders to spend an entire day digging out her mistake. She expected the searing corporate humiliation she used to dispense, but Tobias only said, "The earth fights back, Gem. You can't budget a mountain. You learn its language." She traded her high heels for steel-toed boots, her silk scarves for cotton bandanas. She stopped wearing makeup. Her hands became calloused, her blonde hair perpetually dusted with sawdust. She stopped checking her phone entirely. She often stood in the periphery of Tobias's work, watching him move through the world of sound and touch, marveling at the intimacy of his partnership with Thalia. Thalia, recognizing Gemma's genuine competence and sincere penance, slowly softened. They began sharing coffee, discussing supply chains, moving from rivals to reluctant colleagues. Thalia respected people who showed up and worked, and Gemma finally qualified. 6 months passed, swallowed by the relentless work of building. The community had expanded. Homes were being built not just for the core builders, but for other displaced veterans and families seeking authenticity away from the crush of modern life. Gemma was no longer Gemma Barrett, CEO. She was just Gem, the logistics girl who always got the right cedar planks on time and who could design a floor plan with stunning efficiency. She had found a quiet dignity in physical labor and real purpose. One winter evening, as the first dusting of snow settled on the Three Sisters peaks, Tobias called her name. Not Gem, but Gemma, for the first time since her arrival. She found him sitting alone by a crackling fire pit outside the main lodge. The cold air was crisp, and the stars were impossibly bright, magnified by the mountain altitude. "Sit," he commanded gently, patting the log beside him. Gemma sat, folding her calloused hands in her lap, waiting. The old urge to pitch, to explain, to justify, was gone. "You never asked for the money back," Tobias stated, gazing sightlessly into the flames. "It was never about the money," Gemma replied simply. "It was about getting you justice and saving what little integrity I had left. And you never tried to force me to see a specialist, or force a reconciliation, or apologize for a mistake twice," he added, his voice reflective. "You just worked. You deserve to choose your own life, Tobias. You lost your sight fighting for my freedom. The least I can do is respect yours." Tobias nodded slowly, running his fingers over the rough wood of the log. "The truth is, Gemma, I am thriving here. I don't feel blind, I feel focused. The darkness forced me to listen, to feel, to trust, in ways I couldn't when I was distracted by sight. I can still taste the fear on your skin when you're around, Carter. I can still smell the expensive perfume and the old ambition. But now, when you're here, I can smell the pine and the sawdust. I can smell your honesty. You are a different material now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the old pawn shop ring. the one she had left on the workbench 6 months ago. He didn't offer it to her, but held it between his thumb and forefinger. "I found a new meaning in the darkness," he confessed, "and I found a different kind of partner. Thalia and we are anchors for each other. She is my eyes in the world, and I am her connection to the earth. She's not a replacement for you, Gemma. She's the person who helped me become whole after the ghost you created tried to destroy me." The words landed not as emotional blows, but as final, necessary truths. They didn't shatter Gemma, they grounded her. They were the clarity she needed to release the past. "I know," Gemma said, tears finally falling. But they were tears of cleansing and acceptance, not grief. "I'm happy you found your light, even if I wasn't the person who brought it to you. My love for you, Tobias, wasn't a choice. My ambition was. I chose the wrong thing. And I will live with that. But I won't stop building here because this is the real thing. This is where I find my own light again." Tobias finally smiled, a genuine, powerful smile that reached the corners of his eyes and softened the rugged lines of his face. "Then build, Gemma," he said. "Build with us. Don't look back. The past is just material for the next project." He raised the old wedding ring and, with a subtle movement, flipped it into the fire pit. It landed on a sizzling log, the cheap gold briefly catching the light before being consumed by the roaring flames. Gemma watched the ring burn, understanding that the fire was not an ending, but a forging. She wasn't getting her husband back, but she was finding herself and her connection to the resilient, authentic life she had once scorned. The old, destructive ambition was gone, replaced by purpose and quiet connection. She had hired a detective to find the husband she betrayed. What he told her had indeed shattered her soul, but only so she could rebuild it, piece by piece, into something real and lasting. What happened to Gemma Barrett wasn't a tragedy. It was a purification. She chased power, thinking it would make her whole, only to discover that her true strength lay in vulnerability, connection, and the courage to dismantle the lies she built her life upon. Tobias found his resilience in the darkness, forging a new path built on integrity and purpose, proving that true wealth is found not in skyscrapers, but in community and authenticity. This story shows us that betrayal can be the bitter seed of profound personal growth. If Gemma could step down from the penthouse and find herself in the sawdust, what is holding you back? Don't forget to like this video, share it with a friend who needs an inspiring twist in their life, and hit that subscribe button to join our community. Tell us in the comments, what is the one thing you need to burn to find your own light?